Hi everyone, and welcome to this YouTube channel. My name is Penny, and this is Penny's Coding Bits. In this video, we are going to walk through the conditional random fields model, which is an important model within machine learning because it not only takes the information from the data at hand, but also the context that data is in. So think of a situation where you made a transaction online at an odd time, and within minutes of you making the purchase, your bank calls you saying, "Did you make this purchase?" Because you are making it at an odd time. So, in order for this phone call to happen, a lot of things are taken into consideration, including the time that you made the purchase and the duration between this transaction and your previous transaction, along with a whole bunch of other factors. And those factors are the context of this transaction, which is the data at hand. So let's walk through an example. So in our example of fraud detection, which is a fairly structured data set, we have trained the model with 3 transactions for customer 1 and 3 transactions for customer 2. And each of them are labeled as legit or fraud. And based on the features that are extracted from these data, we will be able to determine if a new transaction that you enter into the user input is fraudulent or legitimate. So we could try saying the amount for this transaction is 100 and the transaction type is deposit, and the time since the last transaction we could say 24 hours, and this is not a foreign transaction and there's no change to the spending pattern because of this transaction. And there, the system is returning a legitimate label for this transaction. Now, what if we increase the amount to 2,000 and the transaction type would be transfer? And the time since last transaction is 1 hour, and it is a foreign transaction, and there's an increase in the spending pattern because of this particular transfer. So there, the system is now saying that this is a fraudulent transaction. And you can use the same algorithm on text input. So a lot of the large language models use conditional random fields to identify the relationships between the text that users input into a chatbot. So let's see how that is working in the backend. So here I have fed this data set into the conditional random fields model, and each of them have a tag saying this is a person, this is not a noun, and this is a number, so quantity. So each of them are being labeled as so. So we can see how they are being trained so that you could enter a sentence into a user input and we could see how the system responds. So let's see if we say, is there any concert in New York next week? So the chatbot is saying, looks like you're asking about a location. How can I assist you further with information about this place? So by saying New York, it picked up that this is a location. So then it can assist you further with regards to your first question. So this is a very simple example of how this can assist in a large language model. And of course, this could be expanded so that we could have something that could carry a very fluent conversation with us. So let's see how the conditional random fields model worked for the fraud detection model, because it's more simple and straightforward, so that we could see exactly how it works in the backend. So first of all, we have our training transactions that is already labeled, and we need to extract features from this data set. And those features are listed here. And to take into account of the context those transactions are in, we need to have a -1 to represent the previous transaction and a +1 to represent the next transaction. And these two functions are extracting the features to be stored together into one list, and the labels for those transactions. And the labels should match the order of the features for those transactions. And once we have the features list and the labels list together, we could put them into a X input for the training and the Y, which is the fraud or non-fraud label for those transactions. And we could start formulating to train the model. So here we use a trainer, and we're referencing the Pi CRF suite, which is the conditional random field suite within Python. And verbals equals false is simply turning off the log so that our output is more clean. And for the X sequence and the Y sequence in the X train and Y train, we are appending the X and Y sequences so that we could use them later on for training. And in order for the training to happen, we need to set some parameters. So the C1 and the C2 are coefficients for the L1 and L2 penalty. So they are used to avoid overfitting. And the maximum iteration is 100, so that we're capping the number of iterations so that it doesn't run on forever. And feature possible transitions. So this has to do with the context as well. So transition simply means the label changing. So in this chart, we have the probabilities of a fraudulent transaction transitioning into a fraudulent transaction. So one is being followed by the other, and both of them are fraudulent transactions. And we can see that the probability is shown like this. And the legitimate transactions being followed by a legitimate transaction is having a probability that looks like this. And we can see that the majority of the cases are legitimate transactions followed by a fraudulent transaction. And maybe that is a tactic for anyone who is looking to compromise the system. So once we have the parameters set, we could train our model and save it as this file so that we could use it downstream. And once we have the CRF model saved, we need to have a tagger that's associated with the CRF suite to open this file so that we could use it to make our predictions. And in order to make the prediction, we need to have a transaction with a list of features, with the label being blank because we're trying to predict that label. And by saying predicted model is equal to tagger tag in brackets test feature, we are essentially filling in this blank field with the transaction being legitimate or fraud. And with the get user input transaction, we are operationalizing this model so that the user can input all of these features for a transaction that they have in mind, and we could run the prediction function on that transaction that they have entered. So that is really high level how this conditional random fields model works. And you can see that it really is a simple logic and yet so powerful that it identifies the context that surrounds basically any situation. So I hope you could make this suitable for your own situations and analyze the context of a data instead of the data itself. I'll see you in the next video.